Hello, my DEP class. So things are changing, obviously. So I appreciate you guys working with me as far as trying to finish out this semester. So it's going to be a little odd, and I'm a little sad. No, I'm a whole lot of sad that I will not get to see you guys the remainder of the semester. The school has decided for the remainder of the spring semester, everything will be online. So, with that being said, things are going to go a little bit differently. I'm going to post videos, they're 30 minutes, hopefully, or less, as a brief preview of the chapter that we normally would have covered. And there will be an updated schedule, so you guys will know what's due when. And then I'm going to make it so that you'll be able to post your homework online rather than having to email it to me. That way it won't get lost because it'll be in Canvas and not on my email. But like I said, so it'll be just a quick video, just kind of outlining the chapter like I would have had we been in class. And then of course the homework and the PowerPoint presentations will be posted on Canvas just like always. The final exam is going to be a little different because we normally do the review in class and then the following week would have the exam. Basically what's going to happen is the final exam will be online and it'll be open book and it'll be fill in the blank versus multiple choice. So how long it's going to be, I haven't really thought about that part yet. I'm still trying to figure it out, but like I always do, it'll work itself out eventually. But hopefully there will be fewer surprises as we finish out the semester. But as always, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to shoot me an email and I will answer you as quickly as possible. I've got my phone on me all the time now, and I'm in front of my computer most days, so I try to answer emails fairly quickly. And of course, these videos will be up for you to watch as often as you would like. But I know you, and you're not gonna, and that's okay. I don't think I'll watch them either. Having them done once is good enough for me, right? Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Chapter 16. And what I'm going to do is I've got the abbreviated PowerPoint presentation that I would have done in class. But of course, all of the PowerPoint presentations that I'm going to allude to or mention will be in the full presentation online, the PowerPoint presentation online. But like I said, I'm just going to go through very briefly and mention just kind of cover what will be in each chapter. And of course, each chapter will have its own video. That way you don't feel like if you're trying to look for Chapter 18, you won't have to watch the whole video. You just go to the Chapter 18 video. And of course, if there's anything that that I mention or talk about and you want more information about or you want some discussion about, I'll open the discussion board. I'll have to double check to make sure the discussion board in Canvas is online. So you guys can always go there if you need additional information, or if you guys just want to chit chat, or if you want to speak to me there. So all right, so here we go. Can't ask any questions, comments, or concerns today, so you're just gonna have to kind of go with me as it happens. So this video is going to cover Chapter 16, which is the psychosocial development of our adolescents. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is the identity. And by the adolescent is the like 6 to 11, I think the ages, or I'll have to double check the ages. But these are your preteens and early teens, I guess, maybe. And so what these kiddos are trying to do is they're trying to find their identity. They're trying to find a consistent definition of who they are as an individual in terms of what their roles are, what their attitudes are, what their beliefs are, and of course what they want to be when they grow up. Because about this time is when everybody starts thinking about, oh, well, this is what I want to do when I grow up, either to be like mom and dad or to not be like mom and dad, or just to go off on some bizarre tangent, which is absolutely okay too. The theorist that talked a lot about identity was Erik Erikson in his Identity versus Role Confusion. It's his 5th stage of development, and he talks about the kiddo trying to figure out, quote, who am I? And sometimes may be confused as to what the possible roles are and what there is out there that they have the opportunity to partake in. The thing is, if you don't know something exists, you don't know to ask about something that exists. So they may not realize there are things out there for them to do because they don't know that there are things out there for them to do. So to help them achieve that identity, they have to kind of put in perspective past experiences and future plans, and then this is where they're going to start to talk to their peers and hopefully their teachers to try to figure out what they want to do. What do they want to do when they grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? It's the first thing I ask you guys, that first day of class. What do you want to be when you grow up? And growing up is not necessarily being an adult. It's just we always want more, and that's good. So what is it that you want to be? Most people are going to change careers, not jobs, but careers 4 to 5 times in their lifetime. So even though you may be something now, that doesn't mean in 5 to 10 years that's what you're going to be, or 15 years, or where you've been versus where you are. So as we as adults experience this and go through this transition, I think those kiddos around us that are watching and learning are going to be a little more hopefully willing to experiment with what they can and can't do. I don't ever like to tell my kids that they can't be something or don't want to do something. Doesn't matter to me what they are. I told them they just better be the best they can at it. And best for one kiddo isn't going to be the same as the best for another kiddo, because they each have their own expectations of themselves and their own limitations. So there you go. So there are 4 different areas that the textbook mentions as far as identity goes. The first one is religion, your religious identity. Most adolescents are going to accept what their parents' beliefs and cultural religious identity is. But this is also the age where they start to question and start to kind of analyze in their own mind. And it's not necessarily that they're trying to turn away from what their religious culture is, or what their parental religious culture is. It's just they're trying to take the religious aspect that they know and have been taught and try to incorporate that into their own lives, and sometimes see that, wait a minute, we say this, but it seems to have fallen short in real life. And so how are they reconciling reality with the ideal, and realize that that religion, even as idyllic as it is, the reality of what life is really like. We say, God is good, but we see the suffering. So it's just them trying to reconcile what they see versus what they believe. Another one is their political identity. More of you guys, as far as, and when I say you guys, I'm talking about you guys as millennials. You're going to identify as independent than any other group. I think you guys are going to create a brand new political atmosphere that we have up to this point haven't seen. I think we're tired of seeing that polarization of political identities or political parties, and realize that the answer may not necessarily be in the extremes, but in some manner of mixture of both. Because extremes of either end are never good, because it's an extreme, it's a polarization. And very rarely will you see the correct answer in either extreme right or extreme left, but that combination, or that mixture, or that compromise, I guess, is really what I'm looking for. So most adolescents are going to identify with right now where most of their ethnicity lies, because there is a solidarity in at least our ethnicity. And there's a security there that we don't necessarily find somewhere else. So I know that if I fall in line with, politically where my peers are, either age peers or ethnic peers, then I'm going to get that support. And then, of course, the older they get, the more they're going to question, and then the more they're going to try to make their own decisions and their own create their own ideals, and then build their future on that. Then the third area is the vocational identity. Of course, as I've already said, that's going to take sometimes years to establish, because your vocation is not necessarily a job. It's not necessarily a career. Your vocation could be to be a parent, or to be a spouse, and to be a parent, to stay at home, and that's what I want to do, or to be a spouse and stay at home and keep the house, and that's what I want to do. So vocation doesn't encompass just the job or just the career aspect. It encompasses life as a whole and their place in it. So it takes years to establish, because in that long term, you have to have that certain education background that you need to learn about where you want to go. And then, of course, you've got the part-time jobs that you're going to work during high school, and other things like that. So, and of course, what we wanted to be when we were little may not necessarily be what we wind up being when we grow up. My son wanted to be a train driver. He was Thomas the Tank Engine was it when he was little. But as he grew, he realized that, wait a minute, yeah, that's great as entertainment, but that's not necessarily, the down and dirty part of it, what I want to be. So, what you wanted to be when you were little does not always does not always become what it is, you don't always become what you wanted to be when you were little. The fourth area is a sexual identity. Erickson says that gender intensification no longer fits adolescent behavior. It's now called gender identity, which is being male, female, or transgender. Gender identity often begins with your biological sex, and then begins to lead into your gender roles. Many adolescents are going to question gender role aspects. Things like stay at home or an at home wife or a housewife. You're now seeing more house husbands. You're seeing more women take that leadership role in the household's financial stability, rather than it being just the males and the females relying on those males. In some situations, I see it backwards, where the wife is the total. She makes up a majority of the income for the household, and the husband is there just hanging out, doing whatever he was. My neighbor's like that. She's very, look, I'm going to work hard so he doesn't have to. But she has a work hard, play hard mentality. She works hard, and, when they go and take vacations, that's what they do. They take vacations. But she wants to take more of that leadership role in that. In that relationship, and this is something that both she and her husband are absolutely okay with. The opposite of becoming all encompassed in your gender role being understanding what transgender is, what being transsexual is, what questioning all those gender type roles. Some kiddos may say, wait a minute, this is just way too much, and are like, forget it. I'm not ever having sex. I'm not ever having kids. I'm not ever going to become I'm not ever going to become part of that population of people that are consumed by having to label themselves. And that's okay, because sometimes, kiddos' brains, especially if we've got kiddos that may be on the autism spectrum, they may have their outlook on life is going to be a little bit different. And sometimes kiddos on the spectrum, their lives don't necessarily they're not seeing far enough ahead in life to say, okay, well, I'm going to get married, or I'm going to have kids, or whatever. It's right now, I just want to be a kid and I want to have fun. I'm stressed out. Okay, I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to watch Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, right? So it can go from one extreme to another depending on the kiddo and the kiddo's personality. Then there's that relationship that we have with adults. That teenage stage is very, very odd. Because they're too little for some things, they're too big for other things. So then there's there becomes this conflict with the parents. It typically, that conflict usually peaks in early adolescence, and that's really more of a sign of trying to, Erickson says it's a form of attachment, because what kids are trying to do is they're trying to learn those boundaries and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So a lot of that is going to involve bickering, arguing, and repeated and ongoing discussions of, why do I have to go to bed at this time? That's what we're dealing with my 15-year-old now. What do you mean I have to go to bed at 10:30? But we're doing school at home right now, so why do I have to be in bed? Because I don't have to get up at 6:30. And I'm like, because we have things we have to do. And so if you want me to be your mom during the day and not do other things during the day, you're going to have to go to bed at night. Well, then they say, well, I feel controlled and I feel chained. And it's like, it's a gnashing of the teeth some days. But the flip side of that, and what we don't always see when we're in the middle of that argument, is regardless of how mad they seem or how upset they are or how frustrated they get, they obviously feel that connection enough and that relationship enough. They trust us enough to argue with us, because they know that even if we argue, we're all going to come back. We may say, look, Mommy needs a 10-minute timeout because I'm frustrated. Okay. But they know that within a few minutes you're going to come back, and you're not avoiding them, or you're not alienating them. You're just having to step back and reassess your thoughts. And then, of course, what we see too as adults is that teenagers go, well, I don't need you anyway. But they do. They may not realize they do, and they may say they don't, but they do, because what happens is they lose that they lose that compass, that directional. We as parents, we direct our children even though they may not necessarily realize it. And it's not because I'm making my kids do one thing or I'm making my kids do another. It's when they get their mind set on something, sometimes it's just like, well, let's think about this for a second. Instead of getting that tunnel vision and thinking that it's a black or white scenario, there are actually various shades of gray. And, again, it's not that polarization, but it's that compromise somewhere in the middle. And sometimes that compromising comes from even within ourselves. This is also the time where kiddos are understanding or start to realize that there are some cultural differences. My daughter's best friend is from Puerto Rico, and so there are things that they celebrate more so than we celebrate, or we celebrate the same things, we just celebrate them differently. And so she's starting to understand and go, wow, wait a minute, this is pretty cool, and I knew we celebrated this, but never thought about celebrating that way. So, or the another way it could go would be, I don't like the way we celebrate this, so I'm going to go over there and celebrate it like they do. And if you're not going to listen to me, then I'm going to go over there. And it just is back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So it's trying to understand cultural differences with our friends and with our community, accepting them, and then living with them as well. and emotional dependency. Adolescents are starting to become a little more independent. In the early days, it's this interdependency. It's somewhat dependent, somewhat independent. So it's what we call interdependency. And this interdependency is actually very, very healthy, because it's that separation of being completely dependent, and becoming, but not yet being completely independent. So as parents, we have to be careful in how we react, because if we criticize kiddos too much, then they're going to stop communicating with us, and we're not going to see anything at all. On the other hand, if we're constantly telling them what to do, how to do, when to do it, then they're not going, we're going to make them impotent, as it will, if you will, because we're not allowing them to grow. We're kind of controlling them. So that closeness is a normative term. It's what's normal for me isn't normal for you. It's subjective. But that closeness of family, however you define that, is important, because it opens communication. It allows the kiddos to realize that there's support. There is some control for everybody, knowing that I can do what I want to do or need to do, but know if I fall down that I've got somebody to come home to. So there's that connectedness that everybody needs. And then knowing that I have a secure relationship at home is going to help me navigate the issues when I have relationship issues with my peers, because there's going to be peer pressure, from how we dress, what we drink, what we smoke, what we take, the selection of friends. We all know that we had friends that our parents didn't appreciate, and if we've got kids, our kids have friends that we're like, whoa, wait a minute, this is not how I raised you. So it's trying to trying to help your kiddos understand how friendships work, and why the selection of their friends is so important. Because what happens is they wind up facilitating in both destructive and constructive behaviors of each other. So it makes easier to do both right and wrong, because they're going to be in there. The peers are going to facilitate what they're doing. So our goal and our hope as parents is to make sure that, or to hope that, our kiddos are involved with people and teenagers and other family friends that that have the same values as we do. And of course, any type of destructive peer pressure or peer support can show another kiddo how to rebel against authority or social norms. And so that the textbook calls it deviancy training, because what we're doing is, the kiddos that want to rebel against society are teaching their friends how to do it as well. And so kind of that whole bad begetting bad, and apples not falling far from their trees. So in one area in specific where this is important is in sex education, because our media is correlating the exposure to media sex and adolescent sexual initiation. The media it wants to correlate that. It wants to say that the more sexually explicit stuff is on television, the more sexual explicit information our children are subjected to, the quicker they are to initiate in that adolescent sexual exposure or initiation. But on the flip side of that, you've got our parents. You're telling us to wait because they want us to avoid specific things, especially if kiddos are not really informed about relationships. So to have that effective communication, especially where sex education is concerned, it's important that communication with parents be open, communicative, warm, and it, to be effective. If not, then kids are going to wind up, this is Rascal. Sorry. Um, anyway, so communication needs to be open and effective, and open and warm to be effective. If not, then they're going to wind up getting that sex education from their peers, which may not be correct. But what happens is, as parents, if we're silent, or if we talk about sex being bad, or if we're vague in our terms, then what's going to happen is our kids are not getting the answers that they want. The thing with kids is they're going to ask questions, and they're going to ask them until they get the answers. And as parents and as grown-ups, we have to give them answers, even though we may not like the answers that we have to give them. We have to look at where they are psychologically and make sure that they have the information that they need in a manner in which they can understand it. And of course, understanding too, that once they understand, or once they have a better concept of where they are, what they're wanting, then they're going to come back to you and ask for a better explanation. And of course, depending on what clique the kiddos wind up in, if they're in the virgin clique or the sexually active clique, the education that they're going to get from their peer groups in either clique, are going to be biased as to whether, or celibacy is talked up among virgins. However, sexual activity is going to be talked up of those who are sexually active. And Hugh Hefner's a great example of this. His, believe it or not, he was raised in a very Puritan household. His parents weren't affectionate, they weren't huggy, they weren't kissy, they weren't touchy. And so he grew up to be, Mr. Playboy Bunny. So, there has to be, again, that middle ground of compromise. You can't be too staunch, but you can't be too frivolous that our kids are coming home with STIs. So, and unwanted pregnancy. So there are things that discussions that we have to have with our children that we may not want to, but because of the environment in which they're growing up, we have to have open and honest conversations. If not, you don't have any idea what kind of information you're going to get. Now, they do have sex education in schools, okay? Now, as a whole, U.S. parents want to be up to date with sex education for their kiddos. But of course, timing of when it's introduced and the content that is introduced is going to vary state by state. And of course, what they're seeing is that abstinence-only programs are not necessarily successful. So if abstinence is something that is important to you and your family and your peer group, then that is something that you're going to have to talk with your kiddos about, and understand that it's going to be very difficult, especially if they're in with a group that doesn't necessarily believe the way you believe, right? Of course, teenagers are known to be moody. They can suffer from depression. Self-esteem for boys and girls dips at puberty. The sad part is the signs of depression mimic those same signs of teenageness. They become moody, they become isolated, but they can also suffer from major depressive disorder. And so the difference between being depressed, the difference between being somewhat reserved and somewhat removed of the major depressive disorder adds in that sense of hopelessness, that lethargy, that I don't want to do anything, and that sense of worthlessness. And that can be caused by biological factors, psychological stresses, and peers. If the peers you've got peers that are undepressed all the time, then your kiddo is going to pick up on that. And what happens there, though, is that sometimes can lead into, and we've seen it so often, and it's so sad, especially with our younger kids, is now we're having to talk about suicide with our young children. There are cluster suicides, where several suicides are committed by members of a group within a brief period of time that make this like this pact, this suicide pact. Parasuicide, any potential lethal action against the self that doesn't necessarily result in death, but it's a slitting of the wrist. It's, even though they don't bleed to death, it's a taking too many pills but not completing suicide. So the sad part is the parasuicide is really common, whereas completed suicides are not as common, but because they are so devastating, that's what we see, sadly, a lot more of. And then even to a lesser degree is what they call suicidal ideation, which is just thinking about suicide. Usually there's some serious emotional or intellectual, cognitive overtones to it, but the point is this is something that they're thinking about. They can also, or in a bid to try to stay away from the suicidal ideations and suicidal thoughts, they may entertain other not so safe behaviors. They may become delinquent. They may start acting out. They may start participating in extreme behaviors. They may break the law. Most adolescents self-report breaking the law at least once before the age of 20. And sadly, most of these most of that population are male adolescents that are from an ethnic minority or from low SEC families. These are the ones that are more apt to get arrested, and as we know, these are the ones that are going to be more often convicted more so than the